Now on BBC One Wales, the BBC News at 1 o'clock with Ben Brown and Rebecca John.
The World Food Programme says Afghanistan is on a countdown to catastrophe, with millions of people facing starvation. The BBC has found evidence that some families there are even selling their children to make ends meet.
The desperation and the urgency of this situation is hard to put in words. There is no more time left to reach the people of Afghanistan.
We'll have a special report from Herat, Afghanistan's third biggest city, also this lunchtime. The NHS in England is promised almost £6 billion to help clear the record backlog of people waiting for tests, scans and treatments. The government says it is leaning towards making it compulsory for NHS staff in England to have the COVID vaccine. The BBC is told the national living wage is set to rise to £9.50 per hour in this week's budget. And global greenhouse gas emissions rose to record levels last year despite the pandemic. The Prime Minister is worried next week's COP26 climate change summit may not reach agreement on solutions.
It's going to be very, very tough, this summit, and I'm very worried because it might go wrong, and we might not get the agreements that we need, and it's touch and go.
In Wales today, Tata Steel calls for a route map from politicians on how it can make the steel industry greener. And a couple from Porthcawl who've both had breast cancer are urging men to be aware of the symptoms.
Good afternoon, welcome to the BBC News at 1. The United Nations says Afghanistan is heading for catastrophe, with millions facing starvation and the harsh winter months still to come. The World Food Programme has warned 22 million people, that's about half the population, are suffering hunger on a daily basis. And the BBC has found evidence that some families are even selling their children to make ends meet. International aid has dried up since the Taliban seized power in August, while the world debates how to deal with the new regime. Our correspondent, Yogita Lamai, reports from Afghanistan now, warning her report does contain distressing images and details from the start.
This is what starvation does to a country, to its tiniest lives. 6-month-old Usman. Habibur Rahman, born 3 months ago. Afghanistan was barely surviving before the Taliban took over. But now, foreign funds which propped up this country have been frozen, putting at least 1 million children at risk of dying. In this ward, 1 in 5 will not make it. Usman weighs less than half of what he should. His father among millions who have no work. Usman's mother told us his twin is in a room next door. This hospital is full. Some babies are already sharing a bed. While we were there, 6 more children were brought in. It's the only facility for hundreds of miles, because without foreign money, most hospitals are collapsing. Doctors and nurses, among masses of government workers who haven't been paid for months. 1/3 of the country's people don't know where their next meal will come from. We travelled out of Herat to a rural settlement. Tens of thousands displaced from remote provinces by decades of war and severe drought. No means of income, barely any food. Some days, families here don't eat. They've sold whatever little they had. And now, some are forced to do the unthinkable. This baby girl has been sold by her family. We're hiding their identity to protect them. Her husband used to collect rubbish, but even that earns him nothing now. Once the baby is able to walk, she'll be taken away by the man who bought her. He's paid more than half of the £400 she's been sold for. That'll get the family through a few months. They've been told the girl will be married to his child, but no one can be sure. We know there are other families here who've sold their children, and even while we've been here, another person came up to one of our team and asked if we'd like to buy their child. The desperation and the urgency of this situation is hard to put in words. There is no more time left to reach the people of Afghanistan. It cannot wait while the world debates whether or not to recognize a Taliban government. Nearby, aid agencies hand out parcels that might save some children from hunger. Alone, they can't provide for the staggering needs. Giving the Taliban money without guarantees on human rights and how the funds will be used is dangerous. But Afghanistan is sinking fast. Millions here will not survive the winter. Yogita Lemay, BBC News, Herat.
It could soon be compulsory for NHS staff in England to be vaccinated for coronavirus. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, says that he's leaning towards such a policy, although no final decision has yet been taken. It comes as the government announces an extra £5.9 billion for the NHS in England, with money used to help clear the backlog of people waiting for tests and scans, and to buy equipment and improve IT in the health service as well. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes has this report.
The NHS is facing a huge backlog of non-urgent diagnostic tests and procedures. This new money, known as capital funding that pays for equipment and infrastructure, is designed to clear by the end of this Parliament most of that backlog. Nearly £6 billion will be used in part to fund a big expansion of diagnostic tests. That means more CT, MRI and ultrasound scans. The government aims to create 100 one-stop shop community diagnostic centres across England, including more than 40 already announced.
What that really means is investment in physical things that are really going to make a difference in tackling that waiting list. So things like, the community diagnostic centres, buying those CT scanners, for example, for more checkups and tests, investment in equipment, in beds, in buildings, in surgical hubs, and investment in IT.
As part of the UK's funding formula for the NHS, a proportionate amount of money will also go to the health services in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Health experts have welcomed the extra money, but they point to the persistent problems around staffing. Extra scanners are no good if you don't have the trained staff to operate them and interpret the results.
Without the staff, we can't deliver these services and deliver on this investment. And we have to remember this isn't just about waiting lists, it's also about the demand in mental health services, the pressure on ambulances, A&E departments.
Those pressures show no sign of easing as NHS staff across the UK face the ongoing impact of the pandemic. The Health Secretary says around 100,000 health workers are still not yet fully vaccinated, and he's actively looking at making jabs compulsory for staff in England, bringing them in line with care home workers. It's a move some experts believe could backfire.
when we speak to our members, they say, it's really tricky because in some ways mandating the vaccine for COVID-19 could be helpful in increasing the number of people vaccinated. But on the other hand, what if it leads to some staff wanting to leave their roles? And that would be really challenging.
Staffing remains the single biggest challenge the health service faces. But given the time it takes to train people, that's a problem that will take years to solve. And there's a danger the extra money in Wednesday's budget may be wasted if the staff aren't available to use it properly. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
The BBC understands the national living wage is set to rise to £9.50 an hour. The Chancellor is expected to confirm the rise, which applies to all those aged 23 years old and over, in his budget on Wednesday. So let's get more details from our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus. What more do we know on this, Damien?
Ben, yes, this is what we've been told, is that the national living wage, so this applies, as you say, to 20 years and over, under 22 and over, under 22 it's called the national minimum wage, going up from £8.91 at the minute to £9.50. That's about a 6.5% increase. Below 22 would also increase by the same rough amount. Expected to be confirmed. We'll get more details later today. And what this is, it follows a recommendation from the Low Pay Commission that was roughly in this area. It's sort of at the top end of expectations. The government is looking to increase that living wage up to about £10.30 in 2 years' time. So it's sort of on track. But it will be welcome, I think, against the backdrop, inflation running about 3%. The Low Pay Commission saying it's aware that this applies to many people who have been on the front lines in the pandemic, who've had a lot of job insecurity, so it's welcome for them. But it does feed through. Other workers may look for pay increases, public sector workers. Now, 2 million or so, 2.5 million of them have had pay frozen, and that could imply that their pay could look to go up too. So this could then feed through to higher costs for employers, higher prices for consumers, higher prices for all of us. So it's a difficult circle that to square, but the details, you say, probably on Wednesday in the budget.
Damien, thank you very much indeed. Damien Grammaticus there, our political correspondent at Westminster. Downing Street has released a recording of the Prime Minister taking questions from school children on climate change today, and he told them about his concerns about the forthcoming COP26 climate change summit in Glasgow.
It's going to be very, very tough, this summit, and I'm very worried because it might go wrong, and we might not get the agreements that we need, and it's touch and go. It's very, very difficult, but I think it can be done. And I think if you look at what the UK has done, we've cut our own CO2 emissions massively.
Well, that was the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, gases which cause atmospheric warming rose to record levels last year. That's despite the pandemic. A report by the World Meteorological Organization shows that concentrations of CO2, methane and nitrous oxide rose by more than the average rate over the last decade. Report's authors say this will drive temperatures above the limits set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. Let's get more now from our environment correspondent, Matt McGrath. And Matt, the report says that the world is way off track on dealing with rising gases.
Indeed it is. As you heard the Prime Minister pointing out there, he's concerned about the failure of COP26. Well, the scientists from the World Meteorological Organization say that the physical facts of climate change aren't getting any easier, aren't helping him out in that respect. They put out a report today that says, as you pointed out, that emissions of or concentrations of CO2 and other warming gases rose last year in the atmosphere despite the pandemic. And this is because CO2 and other gases last for centuries. So even a small little bit of extra emission that goes up into the atmosphere will add to that total. They're really worried about that because, as I say, it pushes us away from the temperature goals in the Paris Agreement. But they're also worried about it for another reason. Land, the oceans, the trees, they soak up large amounts of CO2, and they're concerned that the higher temperatures we're experiencing right now may make those sinks, as they're called, may turn them into sources and may actually make the trouble much worse in years to come. So big concern that the emissions are still high and could get higher if nature isn't particularly kind to us.
Matt McGrath, thank you very much indeed. Petrol prices have reached their highest ever price. Motoring organisations say the average price paid for a litre of petrol is £1.42.94, beating the previous record set in 2012. Diesel prices remain a little below their all-time high. Analysts say it's due in part to a doubling of the oil price since last year. Thousands more drivers in London will face extra charges from today as the city's ultra-low emission zone expands to 18 times its previous size. Motorists whose vehicles are older and more polluting will have to pay £12.50 a day to drive anywhere inside the designated area. It is the first such scheme in the world and will be watched closely by other cities like Newcastle, Edinburgh and Manchester, which are planning to introduce their own low emission zones. Here's Lee Milner.
The extended ultra-low emission zone, one of the largest pollution charging schemes in the world. The principle is the polluter pays. The original zone before covered just central London, but the expansion means it will be 18 times larger. Campaigners say it will help clean the air for pedestrians.
What makes me cross and frustrated is that it's not my pollution that the children are breathing in, it's other people driving past in their cars. And the fact that my children have to walk down those roads to get to school, they have to breathe in that pollution. They have no choice and we have no way to stop it.
If your vehicle runs on diesel and it was made before September 2015, or if you use petrol and it was made before 2006, then you will have to pay £12.50 a day to drive in the zone. If you don't, then you could get a £160 fine. Similar measures have already been introduced in other cities such as Birmingham, where its new clean air zone launched in June is already making a difference.
What we are seeing is that the rate of compliance, the rate at which people are upgrading and replacing vehicles, in particular with the business sector, is increasing. So, for instance, with HGVs and coaches in particular, they're above 90% compliant now.
The existing zone in central London has cut pollution, but despite the health benefits, many say they simply can't afford to replace and upgrade their vehicles.
It literally is our lifeline. It's the only car that we've managed to find in years now that fits all three car seats in as it needs to. I've got twins with autism and another youngster as well. I haven't got the money to pay every time we go to the hospital. I live in Chingford, so I'm like right on the edge of it.
It's a radical change, but one that many cities across the world will be looking at closely. Lee Milner, BBC News.
A teenager who's alleged to have shot and killed 15-year-old Keon Lincoln in Birmingham earlier this year has denied ever holding a gun. The 14-year-old also told Birmingham Crown Court that he had never carried a knife. Keon Lincoln was shot and stabbed outside his home in Handsworth on January the 21st. 5 teenagers deny murder and weapons offences. Well, our correspondent Phil Mackey is at the court for us this afternoon. Just bring us up to date on what's been said, Phil.
Yes, Ben, I'll just take you back to January the 21st this year, and that was when Keon Lincoln was killed outside his home in Handsworth in Birmingham. Video shown at the start of the trial showed the attack. It lasted about 40 seconds. It showed a group of people get out of a car, chase him outside his street, one of them firing a gun and the others carrying knives. That's when he died, and the prosecution at the start of the trial described it as a short and brutal attack. Today, after 2.5 weeks, the prosecution finished its evidence and the first defendant started to give evidence. He's the 14-year-old that they allege was the gunman in the attack. He was asked by his barrister, do you carry a knife? He said, no. Have you ever seen a handgun or have you ever carried a handgun? He said, no, sir. In fact, he said that on the day of Keon Lincoln's death, he said that he had been elsewhere. He'd supposed to have been at school, but after logging on in the morning for a remote session, he'd logged off and spent the day with friends. He said he knew Keon Lincoln because they'd been at school together, but he didn't know him very well, and Keon had left his school a year earlier. He denied being at the scene of the attack, saying he was in a flat elsewhere. Now, as I say, he's been giving evidence today, this afternoon. He'll be cross-examined, and he's already admitted lying to the police in his first interview. That the case here, the trial here, is expected to last another couple of weeks. Ben.
Phil, thank you very much. Phil Mackey reporting there from And the time is 19 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The World Food Programme says Afghanistan is on a countdown to catastrophe, with millions there facing starvation, with evidence that some families are even selling their children to make ends meet. And coming up, we'll be hearing what businesses and residents in Burnley are looking for in this week's budget.
In Wales today, Tata Steel calls for a route map from politicians on how it can make the steel industry greener. And Mark and Pat James from Porthcawl, who've both had breast cancer, are urging men to be aware of the symptoms.
On Wednesday, the Chancellor will be setting out his tax and spending plans in his budget. He has to balance the need to deliver his party's election promises while also finding ways to pay back some of the costs of the COVID pandemic and also deal with the impact of rising prices. Well, our business presenter Ben Thompson has been back to his hometown of Burnley to find out what people there want to see from the Chancellor this week.
Burnley in East Lancashire, a town of nearly 90,000, and it's where I was born and grew up. And it's been a Labour stronghold for more than a century. But at the last election, the town put its faith in Tory promises to level up, to create jobs, opportunity and growth.
This week, we'll find out how the Chancellor plans to do that. So I've come home to find out what people here are hoping for.
Levelling up here means something very different. This firm makes audio equipment for the music and movie industry. It's made in Burnley, but made famous in Hollywood. Its boss says the Chancellor just needs to make it easier for businesses to operate without imposing big ideas from Westminster.
As much as anything, what we want to do is to get any help we can to carry on doing what we're doing, rather than have somebody come and parachute a great political idea on our heads. So I think it's support for what we're doing and to enable us to do it better and faster.
But there are other pressures too. Soaring energy bills and rising prices mean the cost of living is going up for everyone. Incomes are being squeezed. And so can the Chancellor deliver anything to ease our personal budgets too?
We need better pay, because if we don't get paid, if we don't get better pay, people are just going to struggle. And stores like these, I don't think they'll stay around long if we don't have money to spend.
You just got to pay for what you got to pay. If not, work more hours. That's it.
And for people like Jane, who runs a restaurant nearby, rising food and staff costs make it harder to balance the books.
Feeling like we're being constantly squeezed by the government for more. And I think they do that because they understand how resilient independent business people are, and they know we will fight to keep what we've got. If you're going to help businesses, show us how you're going to help them.
On Wednesday, we will see the details of the Chancellor's plans. Spending and investment is perhaps the easy part. Much harder is creating jobs, opportunity, growth and optimism in places like my hometown. Ben Thompson, BBC News in Burnley.
A new report says many councils are still not paying home care providers enough to cover costs such as time spent travelling between visits. The Home Care Association says demand for services to support people in their homes is growing, but care companies are losing staff because of low pay. Last week, the government announced a £162 million fund to help recruit care workers in England. Here's our social affairs editor, Alison Holt.
For 16 years, Denise has been driving around South Yorkshire caring for people in their own homes, whatever the weather.
Doing my job, it's great reward, great satisfaction. Every day is different. You meet different people, different circumstances.
Her company looks after a lot of people paid for by their local authority, but today's report says many councils don't cover the real costs of care, including travel time. She loves her job but understands why many are put off.
You recruit people, but when they go out there and they realise that you're getting up at 5 in the morning, you sometimes won't get home while 11 at night, you might nip home for 5 or 10 minutes. The money doesn't be level with the job for what you do.
How's your interviews gone this week?
Had a couple, a few not turn up.
Back in the office, they've had to hand back some council contracts because they can't recruit enough staff. They want to be able to offer more pay.
Right now, I think we're about 25% underfunded. That 25% would, yes, it would address the terms and conditions that we need to look at for our amazing care workers, but it would also mean we could invest in our office teams, give them some more support for the work that they're doing, and look at other methods. We're miles away at the moment in terms of the rates that are being paid.
The association representing UK home care companies calculates that the minimum cost of an hour of home care is £21.43. That covers the minimum wage, pensions, travel, training, backroom staff and 62p for profit or investment. But on average, UK councils and health and social care boards pay £18.45 an hour, with one local authority paying just £12.68. And in Cumbria, the local authority pays the second lowest average hourly rate at £13.85. It means Kelly's company has stopped council work. Concentrating on private clients means rather than short time slots, people are supported in the way they want.
With it being such a lovely day, we managed to have a little walk by the river as well. It wasn't planned, but sometimes that's very much what the role is. You know, if there's an opportunity to do something, you know, we'll do it.
The standard of care that we deliver simply can't be delivered for the price that the local authority are willing to pay. And that's tragic. It's tragic for the people in the community, and it's tragic for the people that are desperate waiting for care and they just simply can't get it.
Councils say government reforms should increase the fees they pay for supporting people who are older or disabled, but they aren't sure the money will go far enough. Alison Holt, BBC News.
One of Saudi Arabia's former top intelligence officials has described the country's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as a psychopath. Saad al-Jabri claims the Crown Prince even suggested he could assassinate the country's former King Abdullah. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
Two men at war with each other. On the left, Saudi Arabia's all-powerful Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. On the right, Dr. Saad al-Jabri, the former Saudi number 2 in intelligence. He fled to Canada after the Crown Prince seized power 4 years ago. He says he was targeted by a hit squad.
I am here to sound the alarm about a psychopath killer in the Middle East with infinite resources. A psychopath with no empathy, doesn't feel emotion, never learned from his experience, and we have witnessed atrocities and crimes committed by this killer.
The Saudi embassy in Washington has dismissed the claims, saying Saad al-Jabri stole millions of dollars from the government, which he denies. In Saudi Arabia, 2 of Dr. Saad's children have been seized from their homes when they were still teenagers. They're now in prison, accused of financial crimes, which the family denies. It says the Crown Prince has also gone after Dr. Saad's son-in-law.
The first night he was kidnapped, he received more than 100 lashes. He was tortured. He was beaten on his back, on his legs. He was being told that he was detained and tortured as a proxy for his father-in-law, meaning my dad. They even asked him a question. Who do you think we should arrest and torture so Dr. Saad can come back to the kingdom?
Back in 2010, Dr. Saad al-Jabri tipped off Western intelligence about an al-Qaeda bomb plot. Explosives had been smuggled inside printer ink toner cartridges on planes bound for Chicago. The CIA says his help saved lives. Now Dr. Saad wants the US government to pressure the Saudis to release his children.
I have to speak out. I am appealing to the American people and to the American administration to help me to release those children and to restore their life.
Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is currently on a mission to rehabilitate his global image after being accused of ordering the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi 3 years ago. His public investment fund has bought a majority stake in Newcastle United, something welcomed by the fans and condemned by his critics. Today's allegations will only add to the controversy that surrounds the West's dealings with Saudi Arabia. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
The Beijing Marathon has been postponed indefinitely. It comes as the country tries to tackle an outbreak of the highly contagious Delta variant of COVID-19. Officials want to restrict entry to Beijing as they try to rein in the outbreak across the north of the country in the run-up to the Winter Olympics. Cricket now, and all-rounder Ben Stokes has been added to the Ashes squad that will head to Australia next month. He's been given the all-clear by his consultant after a second operation on a fractured finger, which he broke in April. He's also taken time out to focus on his mental health. OK, it's time for a look at the latest weather prospects for you now. Here's Louise Lear. Hiya.
Hi there, Ben. I think if you were to take a straw poll and ask people what they think of October's weather so far, mild, really. Now, over the next few days, it's going to be quite showery. It is mild, but just take a look at this stunning rainbow photo. And if you get caught in the showers, they do mean business. This was Bournemouth earlier on, I suspect. If you can just see it, that's a crazy golf course down there. I don't think there's going to be much crazy golf this afternoon. The showers across England and Wales, pretty hit and miss, but most frequent ones certainly up into Western Scotland, a real cluster being driven in. So some blustery winds here, gusts in excess of 30 miles an hour. So for the rest of the afternoon, we keep the risk of plenty of showers here. For Northern Ireland, England and Wales, sunny spells and scattered showers. So if you do dodge the showers, it'll be quite pleasant. And one of the reasons is, once again, it's quite mild for the time of year. We're likely to see temperatures peaking at around 16 or 17 degrees. It's already 16 degrees in parts of southern England. Now, through this evening, though, we'll keep some clearer skies across eastern England. So temperatures could fall away. However, out to the west, another area of low pressure moving in. Just look at those isobars squeezing together. The winds will strengthen, the rain will turn quite heavy. So yes, it will start off on a chilly note across the east, but wet and windy further west. That rain really will mean business, pushing in across Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northwest England and North Wales to begin with. It will then drift its way steadily north and east into Scotland through the afternoon, with gusts of winds of around 50 miles an hour on exposed coast. Now, across England and Wales elsewhere, it's a bright and breezy affair. Perhaps a little more cloud generally with that southwesterly wind, but the temperatures still pretty good for this time of year. We're likely to see highs of around 17 or 18 degrees as we go into Tuesday. That front, still up into the north, will gradually drift its way south out of Scotland into the north of England by the middle part of the week. So for areas like the Lake District, parts of Lancashire, we really could see some heavy rain and some significant totals starting to develop. But that front, really the dividing line between that very warm, moist air pushing up from the south. So by the middle part of the week, that's when we're likely to see the highest of the temperatures. So a bit of a contrast, really. Sunshine and warmth down to the south, our weather fronts sitting across northern England and parts of North Wales, but maybe a little bit brighter into the far north of Scotland. This mild theme will continue for another day at least, but it does look likely that we'll continue to see some heavy rain at times further north and west, and then just that little bit fresher, but turning a little bit more showery, a bit more unsettled towards the end of the week. Ben.
OK, Louise, thank you. And a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. The World Food Programme says Afghanistan is on a countdown to catastrophe, with millions of people there facing starvation and evidence that some families are even selling their children to make ends meet. That's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me, and on BBC One now, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.